All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on today. This is live webinar, and we're very, very excited because we have our good friend Belinda Román joining us today. She is a economist and was actually ranked by the Wall Street Journal as the most accurate forecaster in 2023. And we had her on the podcast earlier this year to talk about what she saw in 2024, and a lot of those things have played out. And so we thought, hey, what a great time, end of the year here, going into 2025. We have a new administration coming into the presidency and a lot of question marks, right? I think as we sit today, the Fed is actually meeting and discussing whether they're going to cut rates again. And so there's a lot of things happening, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, especially with the new policies being proposed. So we thought, who better than to come on and share their thoughts than Belinda. So Belinda, thank you so much for coming on this webinar today.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's going to be super fun. So for those that maybe don't know much about your background and what you do, share a little bit of that, and then would love to kind of go from there.
Okay, well, I'm an economics professor at St. Mary's University, and I joined the panel for the Wall Street Journal several years ago when they put a call out for new and additional economists to participate. And so I decided, well, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring because A, it's my job, and B, I want to have the experience. And so the first couple of times I was really, really out. And that was a bit frustrating. But as time progressed, I think I was able to give a little bit more refinement to my forecasting. And, as luck would have it, I think it was the 2023. I wasn't spot on, but I was the closest to what the actual forecast came out as. So
Yeah.
I've been doing it now for 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about maybe your process. We talked about some of the podcasts, but just as a rehash on kind of how you look at the world, maybe look at things differently than other economists when you're kind of putting together your kind of big picture approach to what's going to happen.
Right. Well, so, I do the typical stuff. I do go and I, go to pull a lot of data sets off of Fred. The Federal Reserve is very good at collating and putting things together. So I look at all of that. I go to the U.S. Treasury, I'll check some of the other ADP, some of the other websites, and I'll pull all of that together and I'll construct a model. And then I'll run a couple of regressions and forecasting. And then I'll go back and I'll start looking at, well, what's going on in the business press? And what do I see happening when I use San Antonio as my model for a lot of things because it's right in the middle of the road. It's not quite the 50th, but the 47th most dynamic economy in the U.S. So it's kind of middling. So I can use it as my average and say, what do I see? Do I see a lot of vacant signs? Do I see businesses coming and going? You can see a lot of things if you're paying attention. So I do a lot of that and read the foreign press and look at the foreign data sets and then kind of put it together and say, okay, how do I feel? You got it. So it's much an art as it is a science. And I think it's that art part that requires that we think a little bit more about the human element, the human behavioral element in what's happening in these aggregate sets. And I think that helped me in 2023. It was a little bit different, I think, for 2024 because there were so many moving pieces and, surprises that were difficult to predict. But, hopefully I did a decent job this time around.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to dive right in. And just as a heads up for those that are watching live on the webinar here, lucky you because we're going to carve out a little bit of time at the end of this session to do some Q&A. So be thinking of questions as we're going along and things that you feel like we didn't cover or want more insight on. Be sure to keep those in the back of your mind, and then we'll call for questions here in a little bit. But let's jump right in, Belinda. So obviously, top of mind for most people is with the transition of the presidency, new administration, very, very different way that they approach the economy, the way they approach the budget and tax cuts and all these different things. What are you seeing? What are you thinking about? And what do you kind of see, where are we going into 2025? And what are the big things in your radar that you're thinking about?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we know the Trump administration from the last time, in terms of where he wants to go. So I think that gives us a good measure of what to think about. So tariffs, make America first again, that sort of thing. Try to get everything reshoring, the strong immigration policy and development of business. So he's a pro business president. So I think that we can use that as our baseline to understand what's going on. I also feel like this time around, perhaps he's going to be a little bit more measured because he understands the system in DC. Because DC is just totally different from the rest of us, right? So I'm thinking about that. And then, of course, I was actually at the first ever Lone Star Trade Summit, and everybody talking about tariffs and immigration with Canada, with Mexico, and where we stand on that. So I think that first out of the gate is going to be very important for us. Where those, whether or not the tariffs will be as ominous as he's saying and as restrictive, or is that the opening salvo, and is he going to work his way back? And it looks like already Canada's making adjustments, because I saw they announced they're going to spend billions of dollars on border security. What we haven't heard is anything from Mexico yet, have we? So I think those are interesting pieces that we need to think about, because they're the ones that are right there with us, right? Our two contiguous borders. So we need to make sure that everything's moving and flowing properly as it makes its way through everything. And I think those are the big challenges. Yeah.
Let me jump in here. I watched 2017, and when he came out with the tax cuts and the brakes on reshoring of overseas cash for businesses and other things, and reduced the corporate tax rate, I said our economy is going to get on fire, and it did. He is probably the most astute economically president we've ever had. Because of his business sense, I think it. So if he goes all in on tariffs, the worst part, if he goes as far as he could possibly go, the most extreme things that he said, and if he does the most extreme things he said in immigration, I mean, I think we're going to really struggle, economically. But my view is that it's his art of the deal. Right, it's the way he's negotiating, and he's and I believe there has been movement in Mexico. I think they have already started detaining people that are trying to cross, and so he's coming out really strong. But to me, the big question is, what will he actually do? Right, because if he implements tariffs as he's threatened, it is inflationary. Right, it is going to be very disruptive to our economy and for the world. And same with immigration. I mean, we want 15 million people have come over in the last 2 years, but we need labor, right? So anyhow, it really remains to be seen. And so much of our prediction is really predicated on how extreme is he actually going to be versus his rhetoric.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a hard one, because when you watch all the media, domestic media outlets, you got to get the spin out of there.
And they're alarmist. He's saying very alarming things, but the question is, will he actually do them? Exactly. And my gut says no, he's not.
That's what I think. Yeah, that's what I think too. And I mean, he's got some big partners. Texas is a big partner, and I know the governor's already come out and said we can't have that, because you bring Texas down if you do it in an extreme way. So there's got to be some softening. It just, how is it going to play out? And can we, withstand the rhetoric and all the hype around it and see it more clearly? Yeah. And that's a challenge. That's a big challenge.
He's already said, I mean, Mexico is I think our biggest trading partner right now. And if he slapped on 20% tariffs, I mean, you talk about disruptive. But he's already said he's negotiating tariffs against, immigration. So control immigration, Mexico, and we'll forget the tariffs. That's what it feels like he's posturing. I mean, he said this a couple times. So I think we'll see immediately some, maybe some short tariffs, just as he brings the threat home. But I think he really wants immigration to be controlled.
Exactly.
So we'll see.
We'll see.
I think the tariffs against China are probably more real.
Yes.
Right. Because he views China as a greater threat to America.
For sure. And mind you, Biden never removed those tariffs that Trump put on. So they're continuing. So, again, like you say, it's posturing. It's the art of the deal.
Yeah. But, I haven't looked a lot at the economics of immigration. But we are having a labor shortage in America. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that, right? Mm-hmm. So I love the idea of immigration. I just want controlled immigration and responsible immigration, right? And we need people who want to work. So I don't think it's all bad. What's your view of immigration and kind of the labor crisis?
For sure. Everybody, the economists would say immigration is good because it replenishes the labor force. But, it's not that simple because you have labor force that's low wage, low skill, medium wage, medium skill, high skill, entrepreneurial. So it's a lot of different levels of immigration. And, construction is very sensitive to immigration. Agriculture is very sensitive to immigration, but agricultural workers tend to come in on the agricultural visas, the migrant workers. So that's a whole program that's never really actually stopped. So immigration is good, but like you say, the control, because the stress it puts on local communities and the perceptions, and again the negative hype around it, and media, I think, make it very difficult for people to see the benefits of proper immigration.
And especially as you're saying, it may be filling the lower wage or more unskilled type jobs, which we actually need. I mean, when is the last time you haven't seen, McDonald's? You haven't seen help wanted signs at McDonald's or Starbucks, or everybody's just dying for labor.
Yes.
So I do think we need a lot of low skilled, unskilled labor, but we certainly don't need to import crime.
Exactly. That's the issue. And even along the borders, because if you look at the way the vote played out, some of those border communities that were traditionally blue went red, and I think that's indicative of issues like crime, security, that sort of thing. Because people who live on the border, especially the southern border, they have family across the border, so of course they want immigration, don't they? They do, but they don't want crime, and they don't want the illegality that comes with it. And that's a distinction that needs to be made. Otherwise, everybody's very supportive of it.
Yeah, and it remains to be seen what Trump will actually do. Again, my guess is he will deport some, but it's not going to be 13 million people.
No.
We'll see. But if it was worst case, if he really did the massive deportations that have been threatened, what happens in the economy? What kind of dynamics would we see?
No, that tanks states like Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico for sure. And then further afield, because we know that the networks extend all the way to Chicago, to the Carolinas, to the Farm Belt, all of those. So you start pulling all those people out, and you're going to have some significant losses.
And you think economic strength would weaken?
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think it's going to happen, and we're not going to be able to replenish from other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to really think hard about it.
And tariffs again, I think it's going to be mitigated, but let's say it isn't. What if he really slaps tariffs? And let's just say China. What if he implements additional 20% tariffs across the board on China? I mean, that's inflationary. I mean, what do you see?
Yes, it's inflationary, but there's an issue in the tariff, when we do the analysis, and you will probably do this as well in your fund management, that sensitivity, that elasticity. And it depends on what the product is. So if it's across the board, some products are more sensitive to tariffs than others. And so whether or not you can push that over onto the consumer, or you have to absorb it yourself.
Give us an example of sensitive tariffs versus ones that maybe aren't so sensitive.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take, for example, the avocado, right? If he puts a tariff on avocados, that's going to be very hard.
Your guac is going up.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know why? Because Mexico is such a big producer and exporter to us that we basically conceded that product to them. Not that we ever really produced it in the same order. So if we want it, we're going to have to absorb that tariff, the consumer. Whereas if you have products that are on both sides of the border that are produced equally, then you can say, you know what, I'm not gonna pay it. And the business has to absorb it. So you have a cost in a different way.
Gotcha.
So that's what I was thinking when I'm thinking about this question. I'm like, well, what is it exactly that we're going to see tariff?
And we don't know yet.
So. No. And if it's, value added change, some of the value added is very small as it crosses the border. So 25% on something that costs $1 is not the same as 25% on something that costs $100 or $10,000, right? The magnitude. So we'd have to look at those value chains and the maquila business, the twin plants, and see where is all of this actually going to fall.
Okay, what about China tariffs in particular?
Yeah,
because I do think Mexico and Canada is posturing. I don't think China is as much posturing. No. So if he slaps on massive tariffs across the board on China, what do you see happening there?
Well, I mean, everything we get has made in China on
it's
it.
Inflation.
So again, it's going to be whether or not, how significant, how important that item is to the production process, right? So if we're getting components and those components are 25% is not a prohibitive tariff, but it's significant enough to make it costly, and we may end up having to pay more. And there's the inflation again.
And but if he's trying to stimulate local production, reshoring, nearshoring, then it will have that effect.
Exactly.
One of the things that I love about what you do that I think a lot of economists aren't that good at is you're thinking about, okay, well, what behaviors will change?
Yes.
Right. And so, okay, is China going to sit back and do nothing? Chances are absolutely not.
No.
And so there's been a lot of fear of, okay, they'll stop buying our treasuries. And I think that's kind of ridiculous. They don't really have a choice. They're going to keep buying treasuries as long as they have dollars coming in from their trade surplus with America. They're going to have to buy dollars, and they're going to buy our bonds. So I don't think that's real, but I think they can, bring tariffs back to us on, all the stuff that we import from them. The materials, they're the number one processor of metals, zinc, graphite, 100 things, lithium. They're rare earths, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All those things that are really people don't realize how much they are. It isn't just the trinkets we get from China.
Yeah,
it's the raw materials or the processed materials.
Exactly.
From them. And if they put tariffs on us, I mean, it's going to be hugely disruptive. And I mean, you'll see the price of iPhones go up. You'll see the price of, everything go up. But talk more about the China, their reaction and how they might react.
Well, yeah, I think. I think China.
And do you see them stopping buying treasuries?
No, I don't. I don't, because they've got their own issues. Let us not forget that in China, they've got their own issues, and they're trying to figure out how to manage their domestic economy. So they need places to park their currencies, don't they? So I don't see that. And the Europeans are having trouble as well. I don't see them doing there. And the Middle East is in crisis, so I don't see them, doing. So you can. And Japan, I noticed was struggling as well. So the safe haven is us. So I don't see that, but I think if we try to put tariffs on them, they've also been investing in Latin America, where there are a lot of rare earth metals, and investing in Africa. So they're using, these other third parties quite possibly to be their proxy.
Intermediaries.
Exactly. And so it gets harder. Yeah, it's very clever. They've been working and building out ports in Central America. I know that they've got some big investments in Latin America. So I know that they're thinking, okay, it's like a chess game. right? And I agree with you. I think Trump, he's a thinker. He might not present like that because he's also very good at the rhetoric and the show, but I think he's also a thinker, and he realizes some of this that's going on.
Yeah.
And so, it's, he will, he'll think about it. He'll think about it.
So you agree across the board, very onerous tariffs against China could be very disruptive.
Yes.
Really to the global economy.
Yes. Yes.
But again, I would say catastrophic. I don't see some systemic crisis happening out of this. I just see turmoil and prices rising, primary shortages happening, that kind of thing in various areas.
Exactly. And then, and then it's a tit for tat process, right? Game theory. It's like, you did that, I'm going to do this. You did that.
Right.
So there's got to be some logic, and hopefully cooler heads prevail.
Right. Very good.
I saw that the Chinese premier is not coming to the inauguration. So
seriously, that's kind of
it was clever to invite him, nonetheless.
Exactly.
Right.
Hey, Belinda, let's shift a little bit to tax cuts. Obviously, we saw massive tax cuts in the last Trump administration early on.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on how significant do you think he'll go on those, and what will be the kind of downstream impact of that, in the economy? Sure.
Yeah. Well, I think he's pursuing several different types of tax cuts that I think, they sound good. So, for example, on your Social Security or on tips and all of that, he's thinking about those areas. Plus, he's also thinking about the business taxes. So on the one side, that's really good because that frees up, resources. People that have disposable income, you have investable dollars that you can use. But those are also going to be inflationary because we're trying to buy. And then you have these tariffs because they're going to be restrictive. So it's going to be this double whammy if they go through.
Now, how are tax cuts inflationary? Because it increases demand?
Exactly.
Okay.
They can be increasing demand. Okay. And so it's got to be I think they'll have to run in parallel, because otherwise you'll never have enough demand to meet a supply to meet the increasing demand. So you got a lot of dollars chasing limited production. Then we put these tariffs on China and even more limited production. So it has to happen in a thoughtful way. You can do both at the same time. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge. It's a balancing act. So
I think
that's what I'm
Trump
thinking.
can do it,
Sorry.
So, and my guess is it depends what they prioritize, right? They don't have a heavy majority in the House. So, I don't know. I think the current thinking is they're not going to be able to get all the permanent tax cuts in place. It's going to be too contentious with Republicans. That they don't have enough buy-in, so they might try, working on the border first and a couple other things, and the tax cuts second. So we'll see, but no,
you're absolutely right. The backstop or the break is, of course, Congress, and especially the House, because they got to run again in 2 years. Trump this is his second term, so he's, for all intents and purposes, a lame duck president starting out that way, right? So he can only go so far before the next wave of elections, and then the Senate. It's a constant turn. So this year and a half really is
and that's what happened in 2017. He had this gangbusters out of the gate. The economy just skyrocketed on what he did, and then he lost Congress. Yes. And then it was just more chaos,
Exactly. Yeah. They went into a stalemate almost, and it was like nothing got done.
Right.
And so there we are. So it's really a short term. That's why I'm saying, this is probably going to be a short term situation, and then we'll deal with the fallout.
Yeah. I was reading an article or analysis the other day on his proposed tax cuts. Depends what he does, and there's a whole range of it, but some estimates were as high as $4 trillion of adding to the deficit on top of what are already about $2 trillion a year deficit from those tax cuts. And so obviously his mindset is, let's do the tax cuts to stymie demand and hopefully increase production in the U.S. and the business boom to help drive future growth that will then create a bigger tax base and pay for all that. But it's hoping for expected growth, and also in the short term seems inflationary. But the other big piece of this, another big question a lot of people are thinking about is the budget, right? And he's coming in, with Elon and Vivek of the Department of Government Efficiency, and saying we're gonna start slashing left and right. But talk about that. What do you think is realistic from balancing the budget, quote unquote, and what can they actually do to
Did you
cut?
use the term realistic and balancing budget in the same sentence?
Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I can appreciate wanting to kind of manage the bureaucracy of government a little bit more. But, there are a lot of cities and states that are very dependent on the government bureaucracy because of the VA, because, the defense industry in general. Northern Virginia has a lot of different government agencies. So the minute you start cutting away all of that, that's a lot of unemployed people that need to go somewhere. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. What do we do with all of that if we're going to be downsizing in one place? They've got that, it's got to be absorbed somewhere else. And so where's that absorption going to take place? Or maybe not at all. So, I can appreciate it. Having worked in DC, I can see what people are thinking. On the other hand, it's like, this is this tangled web of relationships and jobs that you can't just happily cut and say, okay, bye, because, some of them are very significant and important pieces of local dynamics.
Right.
So I hope that's something that's thoughtful, whatever they're going to plan doing.
Well, and I mean, honestly, I think these guys can make some good headway in reducing bureaucracy and headcount, but that's a different idea than balancing the budget. I mean,
Exactly.
the budget is incredibly far away from being balanced right now, and and what is it? Nearly, it's more than 2/3 of the spending is mandatory spending.
Yes.
On Social Security, Medicare, pensions, these things, and you simply can't reduce it. I don't care what you do, right? Unless you go change the laws, which it's never going to happen, right? Those things are sacred cows.
Yeah.
So and then you add defense in there. That's another 10% or so, and then the rest. There's very little that's actually discretionary.
Exactly.
So there's no chance of balancing the budget,
No.
and it's unfortunate that there has been so little discussion about, really spending, in this election cycle. No one's thinking about it, and we've seen the deficit skyrocket, really started the end of Trump's era, then it just skyrocketed through Biden, and Trump is looking again at, he's not even talking about deficits, and which tells you which way they're going to go, right?
Well, there has to be a commensurate increase in revenues somewhere. So that's going to have to be tax revenues. But if you're cutting taxes, that's not going to work. So how do they do it? You have to increase the income somewhere along the line so that they generate more revenue as well.
Right.
Right. And so all these change, but then you're cutting people's employment. So how's that going to work? The balance is very, very difficult.
Indeed. But you saw in the Reagan era, you saw that actually, reducing taxes increases revenue sometimes because, it's not intuitive. Same in the Trump era, but it brings up the deficits. I've been surprised at how strong the Treasury auctions have been. Right. I mean, we're auctioning 2 to 3 times the Treasuries that we were auctioning just, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
Well, that is massive supply.
Yes.
Why? How is it being absorbed and without rates skyrocketing? And is there a point at which the supply overwhelms demand, and we see rates go nuts? right? Long-term rates start to go crazy, right? People don't realize the Fed controls short-term rates, but long-term rates are controlled by the open market auction. And we're seeing no signs of that. We're seeing booming auctions right now. And I don't know. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about the Treasury markets and long-term rates? And do you look at the auctions? And what are your concerns about the Treasury market and long-term rates?
Well, I was looking at them because I was interested in what the actual FOMC guidance was, and it was all around the auctions, wasn't it? It was all around what they were going to do and not do with their balance sheet. But I think as long as, there was a point where the demand was not as strong as they thought it would be. That was earlier in the year.
Yeah, that's right.
And right. So that changed, and I think that changed because the economic environment, not only domestic but international,
exactly,
is challenging. And so again, we come back to that: is China going to quit buying? Who's going to quit buying? Nobody's going to quit buying because where else do you go?
Right.
Quite frankly, as a safe haven, and there isn't anywhere to go.
If you don't have growth in the equities market, you buy bonds, right?
Yes.
Well,
exactly.
what's happening, and what we don't realize, we have an America-centric view, but we're sitting in a very big world here, and Europe is in the doldrums economically. They're circling the toilet bowl, and so there's a massive buying spree of bonds. And do you want to own European bonds? You want to own U.S. bonds, and you definitely want to own U.S. bonds. I mean, they're far superior, and the same in China and these other economies. The same thing. Korea and other these other buyers. So I think that's boosting the Treasury market. But do you see a problem? Do you see a problem? Do you have a hint of a problem down the road, or are you pretty unworried about it
in terms of the demand for the Treasuries? I think for the short
term
demand. I think for the short term, I think that's where we are. Again, it all depends on how this administration, I think, plays out in the next 6 months, 6 to 9 months, and what other adjustments we see coming. And then we'll come back at it and say, okay, I can see that there's a change here now.
Okay.
But
so at this point, not alarmed, and long term, you're withholding your
yes. Yeah, I'm waiting. There's we don't have a new administration yet. We just have a lot of talk, right?
All right.
Yeah.
But
you haven't talked about GDP growth. I know that's going to be your big forecast, and you've not completed it yet. Yeah. But give us a sense. What's your forecast going to be? Is it going to be strong, or is it going to be weak?
No, I think it's going to be strong. I think it's going to be strong because all the signs are there. You can tell, right? And you can already tell from we haven't been able to slow it down. Actually, the Fed hasn't been able to slow it down.
They haven't.
And again, if we're the safe harbor and we're the ones that can actually maintain the global economy, then we have to keep growing. Right. While we're waiting for Europe or whoever else needs to settle in. So that means we've got to have that kind of growth.
Right.
But that doesn't, I think to me, some of the issue is that when you read the press and you might see that, one part of the country is struggling, the other part is a little bit more dynamic. You see all these different pockets of experience, and those are not the same as this big macro picture.
Right. Exactly.
And so that's where I think some of the confusion comes in. But,
right. I mean, exactly. You hear all the time, the consumer is struggling and the dollar stores and all this. But then if you look at consumer spending from Fred, right, it's been up and to the right. I mean, people are spending. On the whole, people are spending. Yeah, the lower quartile is really suffering, but overall, people are spending like crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, but so GDP growth goes to inflation. Again, I know you haven't finished your models and all that, but do you see inflation being stubborn and or being difficult to get down and or trending up, or where's your inflation thinking coming?
Yeah, I think that we'll still have a hard time with inflation. Let me put it that way. Yeah, I think so. And we're already seeing it. For a while there, I thought, okay, well, maybe it's working, but no. No,
Yeah.
it's
if the economy is strong, you're going to
Yeah.
see hiring be strong, right?
Yes.
And if hiring is strong, because we are already in the knife's edge with labor shortage, you're going to see
Yeah.
labor wages continuing to increase, which is good and bad, right?
Yeah.
And they're also going to see energy demand. Those are the
Yes.
two wild cards to me, right?
Yes.
And if energy prices, oil prices stay high and labor prices stay high, inflation is going to be a bear to come down. So I see inflation being sticky like you do, and I see them not being able to bring rates back down to the 1% range like people think.
No, I don't think that's
I think we're going to be more stuck in the current range. Maybe it'll come down.
Yeah.
Short rates.
I agree with that. Yeah, I don't think they're going to come down as quickly as everybody. Those optimistic at the beginning of the year, there would be 6 or 7 rate cuts.
I know, like 9. It was the dot plot was 9 reductions, and of course that went out the window. Yeah. I mean, what would be how far do you think they can go? I mean, do you think they can come down much more, the rates?
And as a heads up, they did just cut 25 basis points while we've been on this webinar.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, and I think
you called it, Belinda. You called it.
Yeah. They're going to. They had to do that. Actually, they had to, because Powell was very clear. Whatever's going on in the political winds and everything else, we're going down this road. Now the question is, once we get into 2025, is that road gonna change a little bit?
And what's your view? Is the road going to be downhill or downhill, level out?
No, I think I think they're going for about 3, maybe 3.5, somewhere around there, because they can't really go much lower as things are right now.
Yeah, well, that would be very beneficial for real estate and everything else. So,
do you see them hitting that before the end of next year? Because with a 25 basis point cut, they're probably 4.25, 4.4 right now. So that's still another 100 basis points to go. Do you think that's going to be achieved in 25, or what would determine that?
I think it's going to be achieved in 25, and then in 26 they're going to try to get closer to that 2.5 that they've been targeting.
The 2.5% inflation rate.
Yeah. So I think they're trying to do it over a couple of years. But of course, the spanner in the works is Trump got elected, and things are, kind of turned around, and so we've got to wait and see how some of these things change. They're not quick to respond to the market noise and the media noise. They watch very carefully what they're going to do. So I don't think they'll just all of a sudden turn around and say, okay, let's go for it, like we would maybe hope. So they got to be measured.
If we see Trump come out the gates really strong, because to your point earlier, he really has a window here in the first 18 months or so to push a lot of this through.
Yes.
And we see inflation start to take up. What do you think that does to the Fed? Does that change their kind of perspective on the downhill cut here?
Yeah, they may flatten out and try to use some of their other monetary tools to see if they can do something before they start, saying, okay, well, let's raise the interest rate again. Because the minute they raise the interest rate is the minute that everybody panics, right? Had they not made the cut now, everybody would have been like, oh, no. The Fed's worried. Right? Right. So
it's a mind game, isn't it?
Yes, it is. They're very much about expectations.
Right.
So they were like, no, we're going to keep going because this is our plan. But as things start to develop, I think they're going to be thinking about, okay, well, if we go up, that's it. That really spooks people. And I'm not sure we want to do that yet.
Okay. Well, we got some limited time left, about 15 minutes. We're going to transition to Q&A. We've already seen some great questions drop in the chat here. So let's start hitting some of these. If you have other questions you've been thinking of, please put those in. We're going to come to those now. So great question here by Gerald. We've already hit on this a little bit, but let's dive in a little bit more. So the Fed just cut interest rates by another 25 basis points. Would appreciate hearing thoughts on long-term Treasury rates, 20 to 30-year bonds.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a little bit shorter term, but what do you think kind of long-term rates are going to look like?
Yeah, normally when I do my forecast, I'll look at the 30 and the 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, give us your answer for that.
Yeah, and so they've been a challenge, but what is it? The 30 was at what, 4.4, I think, if I'm not somewhere around there.
That's about right.
So at least the last time I looked, and I had them up around 4 when I was doing that. So I'm thinking, they're going to probably, maybe they'll come down a little bit. But again, what's going to happen? I mean, the Treasury bonds and how the Fed manages the money supply and what they decide to do with their balance sheet is very important, and how they're going to play out that policy, because that is what is governing some of this movement, right? And then afterwards, the resale of them. So I'm thinking we're still watching some of that.
So
play out. Those are hard for me. Those are hard.
Yeah. So you said before you thought there was a balanced, supply and demand was fairly balanced right now. So he's not going to move much and you're withholding judgment. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Those are always the hardest ones for me to kind of look at and say, okay, what's really going on here?
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Peter Luther. Won't energy come down with more drilling?
Yes, it will. But the last time,
who said we're going to drill more?
Yeah, exactly. Who said? I mean, Trump once has said, we want to open up and do more drilling. But do the companies want to do more drilling?
Exactly. Trump doesn't own any drills, I don't think.
No.
So
yeah. And the last time I heard a presentation from the energy economist at the Fed, the Dallas Fed, but the one that they have in Houston that's really plugged into the energy sector, he said, they're not interested in drilling like that. They're not interested in drilling like they used to. So it's going to have to come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob, what was it? We were just looking at Chevron just put out some of their expectations.
And they said they're not interested in drilling. I mean, no one is right now. No one's interested in crashing the market. They're interested in just great long-term growth. We saw a lot of the drilling on federal land being shut down. We'll see if Trump opens that up, which that would if you're bringing more supply on, but that would take years to develop. It takes years and years to develop an oil field. So it's not going to affect pricing anytime soon if he does that.
No. And on the flip side of that, if we are cutting taxes, we are bringing manufacturing back and driving a hot economy, that's going to increase demand for fossil fuels, right?
But the biggest marginal demand is from China, and if China's economy is in the doldrums, which, in my view, they're in full crash mode right now, and they're trying to prevent it. They're trying to parachute it down, but I don't see demand from China increasing anytime soon.
No.
And that's,
as a matter of fact, I think.
Oil.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that I saw on I think it's the Financial Times. Had a piece on the shift in China to EV, and that was surprising, the extent to which they were shifting to EV.
Yeah.
So I found that interesting. So there's all sorts of things moving there, but the U.S. companies are not interested in drilling, and all the easy to get to oil has already been got, hasn't it? So now they got to, if they're going to do it, it's going to take, to your point, it's going to take much longer, and it takes more technology, and that takes time.
Yeah. Well, I think China has a ton of coal. I know they have a ton of coal. So they would much rather power their vehicles by electricity, coal generated electricity, than by oil, which they import. So that isn't super surprising to me, I don't think,
Right.
Yep. We have another question, a couple more questions here. The consumer, this is a good one. So what's the true condition of the consumer? Can their spending continue at the current pace? We have this in a few different ways, but good question.
Yeah, very good question, because at the same time that the consumer is happily spending, so their credit bills are also going higher. So you got to ask yourself if some of this spending is driven by credit cards, and credit cards with very steep interest rates. Some of them are like 29%. So, and wages, although they are growing, they're not growing. They didn't grow as quickly as everything else did. They're starting to catch, over these years, they haven't caught up. But so I wonder about that. And then you start to make all these changes in the employment, because you're cutting here, you're cutting there, that large dependency on on the public sector at all these different levels. So I wonder how much longer the American consumer can be as buoyant as they are right now.
It's been surprising how resilient the American consumer has been. I do think it was all stimulus driven, but stimulus has been a long time ago. So we'll see. But I know wages are stubbornly high. You saw a lot of real wage growth was substantial over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And since the COVID era, right? And very, very strong. So I think a lot of people are feeling flush. Add to the stock market, the wealth effect, right? The stock market being high. You look at the spike in homes prices during COVID. So you have the wealth effect in full force. So all those things are fueling it. But yeah, I'm a little surprised too. I mean, how long does it run? We'll see. I think you saw consumer sentiment now for the first time getting more optimistic, and I think it's because of the election.
Yes,
well, consumer sentiment drives willingness to spend.
Yes, exactly.
Again, I think it's going to run for another year or two. Would be my guess. I mean, I can't say more after that, but I think it's going to keep running for a bit.
Yeah, but this is another one of those ideas where you've got levels. The strata of spender. So the spending that takes place at the higher income is significant. It's buoyant. But as you go down the income levels, it's starting to slow.
Very much so.
And so it's how much of a drag is that going to be? Because how many yachts can anybody buy? I don't know. Those kinds of questions. So it's that lower income, middle income that we might be wanting to think about.
Yeah.
Next question here. Isn't Trump's thoughts with tariffs to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think he's always been an advocate of that reshoring. Let's bring some of those jobs back. So I think that's part of his strategy to see if he can coax more investment in the United States, or closer, and that way we have more jobs, right? And better paying jobs, because if some of that technology work comes back, it's better paying jobs. So that kind of offsets some of the other things that are going on. So I do think he's interested in seeing more of that come back to the U.S.
Yeah, but so much of manufacturing can't come back, or like the rare earths. I mean, or some of the things that they're processing all these raw materials in China. No one wants that in America. So and it's going to take a while. It's the reshoring trend is already in massive force. It's already a huge trend. I think they're spending over $1 trillion a year right now to reshore. U.S. companies are. So, I think it'll help all that.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's part of his strategy.
Sean, how are Belinda's comments affecting decisions Aspen is planning to make it in 2025? Good question. And we're actually going to be doing our own State of the Union first week of January, talking about our perspectives on the economy and where we see opportunities from an investment standpoint. So we're going to address all that in a couple of weeks.
Stay tuned
for that. Yep. Okay, next question. I think we got a couple more here left, and then should be wrapping up here pretty quick. Paul, hey, Paul. What do we know about the amount of cash that might be invested in 2025? Maybe level of investment from institutional investors or retail investors. I mean, from my perspective, there's been a lot of cash on the sidelines from an investment mandate standpoint, but not a lot of deals that have been penciling. So like in 2024, it's the lowest level of transaction volume we've seen in over a decade. And a lot of that is driven, and I'm talking specifically real estate, because that's really where we focus a lot of our acquisition focus on. But the going forward, a lot of that I think depends on what happens to interest rates, because there is that kind of sweet spot. I've been hearing from multiple brokers in our space that saying, if rates get cut, 100 basis points, which is a big cut at the end of the day, that is going to massively increase the cash that's coming back in the market. But until we kind of get more to that neutral zone of where it starts to make sense, where sellers are willing to sell and buyers are willing to buy at, it's still going to be stalemate. Thoughts from a broader perspective, Belinda, even outside of real estate, that you're seeing just from investment into the U.S.
The dry powder on the sidelines.
Yeah, the U.S. is a good bet for investment, isn't it? Especially if you're looking. I always think of it in terms of safe harbors for everybody that's got cash. So we may just see it sitting in the banks in the U.S., which happens a lot, and that gets recycled. That's money in banking 101. The more savings you get in the U.S., the more investment capital that banks have for other things. So, I don't look too much at these types of issues, but I do see that, some of the banks are really solvent. And so they got a lot of cash. So that means there's money to fund some of these real estate deals if we ever get to the right interest rate. Yeah. Or even startups. I'd like to see more entrepreneurial activity.
Yeah, we haven't seen the crash in the real estate market that a lot of people predicted, right?
No.
Commercial, and because the servicers just extended, right, and modified the loans, and investors are holding out, refusing to, and I don't know if that's going to change, especially if rates come down.
Yeah,
so they will be rescued by the low rate environment.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap. So.
There you go.
Belinda, we got one more question here. Okay. Last question, then we'll be done. Another quote from Trump is to reduce credit card interest to 10%.
That would be popular.
He'd be reelected again and again as a write-in. Because we were just talking about that, because some of the credit card rates are, they're 29%. So he does that, and they'll just write him in all the time, because I don't know that the banks, the lenders will be that happy with the credit cards, but he certainly.
Yeah, I think the credit would probably evaporate, right, to most consumers at that rate. But
yeah,
Belinda, what's the best way for folks that may want to hear more of your insights and kind of follow along with your perspectives? We have a URL here, romaneconomics.com. Is that the best place for our listeners to engage more with you there?
Absolutely. Or, write to me at Belinda@romaneconomics.com. I should spend more time putting my thoughts out there, but then, I'm doing things like visiting with you and driving around town looking to see what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Cost-benefit analysis there.
When will we see your official forecast for 2025?
It'll be about 10 days into January. That's when the Wall Street Journal calls for it, and then they publish it. So that'll be out by then.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Exciting. Well, Belinda, it's always a pleasure to get to do this with you, and we're so thankful for you to take the time. And we love pulling out the thoughts out of you, because it's a lot in there that it's really valuable. So thank you so much. Hopefully everyone got a lot of value from this webinar, and be sure to sign up on our website for our newsletter and get more information on webinars like this. So with that, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.